Welcome everybody to this AOP webinar with the title of Can We Be Whatever Weight We Want Now? And this is aptly timed for before Christmas. So we've got an absolutely fantastic panel today. And if those of you attended AOP webinars before, what essentially we're trying to do is to address emerging issues in medicine that you may not be fully aware of, but are going to transform the way care is happening and the way science is thinking about medical issues. And hopefully we can do that for you today. So it's part of a wider series of emerging issues, which will continue into the new year. And for those of you who may not be regular attenders at AOP events, just encourage you to become AOP members and remind you that we have an absolutely fantastic meeting happening in Liverpool, April the 20th to the 21st. And it's about translational medicine. So it's relevant to all areas of medicine. And we'll have some excellent speakers from Sir Patrick Vallance onwards. There's a great collection of people talking at those events. So today we're going to we've got three panelists present. We have Professor Sadaf Farooqi from Cambridge, there she is, who has a very distinguished career in studying the regulation of appetite and body weight, and has made many major advances, which she'll tell you a little bit about today. We have Professor Barbara McGowan, who's from Guy's Hospital in London and runs an extensive weight loss, weight management service, running through from bariatric surgery to other measures, and has run many trials in some of the newer measurements measures around weight management. And Rob Andrews from Exeter, Associate Professor in Exeter, who also has done a lot of studies, both in terms of lifestyle and in terms of bariatric surgery. So experts in these fields. We're going to ask them to talk for about 6 minutes each, and they'll walk us through the developments in this field. And as this is happening, we strongly encourage you to pop your thoughts or questions into the Q&A, which you should be able to do. And I will monitor those and make sure they come into what we hope will be about half an hour of panel discussion and answering your questions towards the end, so we can find our new way through this field. Okay, I'm going to ask Sadaf to begin. Can we ask you to share your screen and talk to us? Just to let everybody know, we will be recording today, so you can follow it afterwards on the AOP website.
Okay.
Sadaf.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Colin, for the introduction. Hopefully you can see my slides. Great. So I just want to really set the scene when we're thinking about obesity, which we know is a huge clinical problem, mainly because of the associated complications of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, and even some forms of cancer are more common in obese people. We know that it's really changes in our environment that's been driving the rise in the prevalence of obesity. We have much more access to high-calorie foods. It's easily available, and it's very easy then for us to exceed the amount of energy we expend with the amount of energy we take in. And it only really requires a small imbalance between what you eat and how many calories you burn to result in weight gain over time. However, what's been less clear is why, if we have this really strong obesogenic environment, is there so much variation in how much weight people gain. Now, there have always been some individuals who are predisposed to severe obesity. What we're seeing now is a larger number of people developing severe obesity, as well as a change in the mean BMI or body mass index of the population. Now, why does that happen? Well, actually, there have been studies in twins over many years, which have shown that identical twins or monozygotic twins have a very similar body weight, fat mass, and fat distribution, in contrast to non-identical twins. And that has really supported the evidence that genes play a major role in our weight and regulating weight right across the spectrum. They influence how we respond to our environment and who is more likely to develop severe obesity. What are those genes and what do they do? Well, we now know through the identification of several of those genes, originally in mice and then in people, particularly children with severe obesity, that those genes map onto a pathway that is fundamental for regulating weight. Now, this was actually fairly recent discoveries from about 1994 onwards, led us to understand this whole system that is there to regulate appetite and weight and keep weight stable in most people over time. That system is focused on the hypothalamus in the brain, which receives signals or hormones from our fat, including the hormone leptin, and also signals from the gut, which tell us about nutrient availability after meals. Now, leptin is particularly important because when it's missing, due to a genetic condition, for example, children become very, very hungry. They behave as if they're starving, and we can treat them with recombinant or synthetic leptin and restore their appetite to normal. And what that showed us is that leptin is a major hormone that regulates appetite and weight. And that appetite, which until then, people had generally thought of as being something that was under voluntary control, has a strong biological basis. Now, where is this relevant in general clinical practice? Well, it's relevant because when people lose weight or go on a diet, of course, their leptin levels fall. The less fat you have, the less leptin you make. And that fall in leptin is a driver to then increase your appetite and regain that weight. And that's often why people who lose some weight on a diet will rebound and regain that weight. In the past, we've tended to think that's because they're morally weak or they lack willpower. Actually, this is all down to biology. Now, I just wanted to give you another example of how the way we're looking at genes is shaping our understanding of the physiology of weight regulation. There's one particular gene, I'd say it's probably one of the most important ones. It's called the melanocortin-4 receptor, or MC4R. It's in the brain, and it's a key switch that's triggered after a meal, putting a brake on hunger. Now, 1 in 300 people in the population have a genetic change in this gene, MC4R, that stops it working effectively, and those people will tend to gain weight from childhood, and some of them will become severely obese. In contrast, 6 in 300 people will have a different type of genetic change in MC4R that makes the receptor work more effectively, and those individuals are protected against obesity and indeed have a 50% reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. And what we're finding with more and more different types of genetic studies that are happening now is that you can find lots of different genes when you can add them up together to make a risk score, which is beginning to predict who is likely to be more likely to gain weight and become severely obese, who might require treatment for their obesity with bariatric surgery, for example. And this is because it's genetic factors that predict the severity of obesity. So overall, what we're finding is that there are genes that are driving severe obesity, some causing a very strong monogenic form, others adding up to increase a person's risk. But there are also genes that protect against obesity, allow some people to eat what they like and not gain weight. And we're beginning to now find some of those critical genes for thinness. And just finally, why is this relevant to policy or to clinical practice? I think it really helps to frame the way we think about the clinical challenges of obesity. It's complex. We know there's a huge role for social factors and environmental factors. But as physicians, we need to also bear in mind the biology that's underlying susceptibility to obesity. And this is important when we're thinking about treating patients, particularly those with severe obesity, where we need to move away from blaming people from causing their own obesity because they lack willpower, to actually recognizing the huge role of genetics and biology and supporting people with their weight. I think this is really relevant for policy because we need to think about access to medical and surgical treatments for those who have a high biologically driven risk, and at the same time, look at changes in the population and community interventions to modify the risk across the population. Thank you.